the Hastings Public Library. This is one of our summer reading programs, and we are honored to have Pastor Paul Dunbar. He's been a bird watcher here in South Central Nebraska for 20 years.
Yes.
And he's become a local expert on identifying and finding birds in our area. He is a Lutheran pastor by vocation, but he's drawn to the outdoors and loves getting phone calls from parishioners and community members about birds.
Absolutely true.
But with COVID, he's kind of felt cooped up, so he started something new, and basically in Adams County, trying to identify birds only in the county. So he started on January 1st of 2020, correct?
2021.
2021. He's found a bald eagle and a belted kingfisher at Lake Hastings. Day 2, he added prairie falcon and a Lapland longspur. So that's just driving around Juniata and the Prosser area. So we just want to welcome Pastor Paul Dunbar and hope you enjoy our program.
So birds are the thing that get me excited. And it's always hard to explain to somebody why I like birds. But I think that that's true of most interests. So this is the one and only time I've ever been to a Huskers game. Someone gave me tickets, and I know that it's, what's the word, anathema. It's forbidden to admit this, but I don't care at all about any of this. Football, I don't watch sports. And for some people, it is just, right, you just love it so much. You love following statistics. You love watching that long arc of a perfect pass and the guy that catches it with one hand in the end zone, and it's like, it does something for you, right? And I think if somebody asked you to explain it, why is it that you are just so enthralled with Husker football? I don't know. Would you be able to answer that sufficiently to somebody who just doesn't get it, you know? But I think hopefully everybody has their thing. Whether it's a love of sports, local sports, national sports, scrapbooking, coin collecting, the perfect yard. You know, the neighbor that's like catching leaves before they hit the ground, just perfect yard. It's an obsession for some people, and I don't care about it that much. That's not one of my things. And I don't know that they can explain to me what it is that just grabs them about, that makes them so passionate about the perfect yard or garden. Or recipe. Do you have a thing? Do you have a thing that you're passionate about, that gets you just excited? Maybe you get paid to do that thing. A lot of times you don't get paid to do the thing that you really love to do. Birds are that for me. And I think it started in high school. My folks always had a bird book around, a pair of old binoculars, Sears and Roebuck binoculars. And so I knew they had a bird feeder up. So I knew cardinals, and I knew some of the local things. And then in high school, I had one biology teacher who would quiz us on birds before class got started, Mr. Baumgartner, back in northern Indiana. And I discovered that I was really pretty good at it, you know, like, that's a robin, I know a robin. And other kids would say, how do you know that? It's like, how do you not know it? I don't know. But he gave me, dates me a little, but he gave me a copy of a boxed set of 4 vinyl records of bird songs. And I listened to, from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and I listened to these 2 science records over and over and over again through a summer, and I was probably 14. the exciting thing was lying in bed, no air conditioning in our house, so I always had the windows open, and hearing at like 6:30 in the morning a song, and laying like, that's on the B-side of the third album. That is an Indigo Bunny, and I've never seen one, but one is close, and it's at my house, and running outside and getting my binoculars, and sure enough, there it is, the Indigo Bunny in the yard. It's like, how cool, I knew that. So I just listened to that record until I had it, all 4 records until I had it memorized, and so that's kind of stuck with me. I do most of my birding by ear, so most of what I hear outside, I know what it is, and if I don't recognize a song, it means it's probably something rare. So there's really almost never a time I'm not birding. I can't really turn it off anymore. If I'm driving down Burlington, my brain is ticking off. If I just have the windows open and I'm listening, it's like, I know there's a Carolina right outside, and I know that there's these different things. So, that's kind of funny. I wasn't planning to share this, but I'll just dig for just a second. But my mom sent me, she's back in Indiana right now, and she sent me just a little video and said, it's a video, but it's not even like moving, it's just pointed out the screen door. And she said, what birds are you hearing? I wish this could go louder. So I said, well, there's house sparrows. It starts with house sparrows, and then there's a cardinal singing, and there's a red-winged blackbird, and there's American goldfinches. And I think in the background is a red-bellied woodpecker. And she's like, how do you do that? Anyway, I don't get into football, but this is mostly, what I love to do. With me out of Lake McConaughey. Body scope, just checking stuff out. As Dana said, back in January, feeling a little cooped up, I decided take a drive, January 1st. Among the birding community, a little game is, what's the first bird you see on the first day of the year? So, and you always kind of hope it's not something lame, So, I was glad I got a white-breasted nuthatch, but I drove around Nebraska. I decided, what if I just stay in Adams County? Back in 2013, I challenged myself to see how many birds I could see in Nebraska in one calendar year. And I just birded every corner of the state all year long. It was ridiculous. It was obsessive. Weird and really fun and very competitive. It's with other birders in the online birding community, but I thought that's too big. So what if I just stayed in Adams County, which is like 23 by 24 miles? I thought, how many birds could I see? So I thought I would challenge myself and get out and see stuff and listen to stuff and discover new corners of our county. And on the surface of it, especially for somebody who's not from Nebraska, you say, boy, that's a lot of nothing, right? Like, where are the birds in this landscape? What do you look for in an area like that? This was from January 1st or 2nd. I mean, look at that. It looks like, what's that thing, place in Star Wars? The Hoth? The moons where, like just barren landscape. But, yeah. These are all places in Adams County, and you think, bird watching here? Yeah. This little guy's out there and loves weather like this. You know this bird? This is a horned lark. If there's ever snow on the ground around Adams County or just in south central Nebraska, and you're driving around and there's these little flocks of birds that fly up from the roadsides, especially when the snow is right up against the roads. It's almost always these, sometimes mixed with the Lapland longspurs that Dana mentioned. There's thousands of these, and they love the open, at least we call the prairie horned lark. Cute little guys, yellow throat and black mask, and funny little tufts that aren't quite like any other bird that I know of, but very common in our area. There's the first bird I found of the year. This is at Parkview Cemetery, a white-breasted nuthatch, and they go up and down. You're almost always going to see them like on the vertical trunk of a tree. So I remember I took this to be framed, and they framed it like that. They tipped it. They were like, that looks wrong. I said, well, it's on the trunk of a tree, so that is right, actually. Early on in, like this is day 2, driving around Adams County, out in a cornfield, is this merlin. I caught him mid-hop. And just such a stunning bird. In fact, within about 15 miles of my home, I found at least 3 different individuals of those, because I would find one, and a few miles further on, I'd find another. Really great predators of the open country. They love eating like horned larks that we saw earlier. But isn't that a beautiful bird? So many interesting, intricate patterns of its feathers. And by the way, these are my photos that I take by a method called digiscoping. So I almost always have my trusty old Zeiss scope and tripod. And in this particular instance, I just had the head popped off and resting on the windowsill of my car. And then this is just, a giant monocular, basically. And it zooms up to 60, brings the thing 60 times closer. And so I just open my camera and hold and center, and then take pictures of my iPhone through my scope. And that's what this is. That's what almost all these are. It's a fairly simple camera. Sometimes I use point and shoot cameras. But I use that as my lens, my long lens.
So you have to move your iPhone around until you see the image?
Exactly.
So that is surprising me, because I know they make some that you can attach to.
Yes, they'll sell you. They're happy to sell you a $300 attachment. That is a replacement for my hand fingers. Yes. No, yeah.
Smile, because I was doing that with our binoculars.
Yes.
To capture the whooping crane.
Absolutely. You can do the same with your binoculars. You just hold your phone up to your binoculars, and it's a challenge to get the binoculars focused. If you have a windowsill, it helps. And then get your camera app open, and then zoom the camera in a little bit, and just again, you need about one more hand than you have, but it works. And
I have had no luck. Zero.
The tripod helps a ton.
Tripod.
So that it can that part is, you get it focused. And it's very tough to get birds in flight. So most of my birds are sitting birds instead of like soaring birds, because that's really tough. Like I had a golden eagle, and it was just soaring, and it was like, okay. Snap. Looked at my phone. 8 pictures of empty sky. Driving around Adams County, this is one of the challenges to go find birds in interesting places. Is you get any kind of weather, and our minimum maintenance roads can be a challenge for me and my 2-wheel drive vehicles. But if you're looking for interesting birds, one of the most underappreciated habitats is this. We sometimes called sheet wetlands. where rains come, especially in the spring, and flood a section of cornfield right along the road, you hit this at just the right time, and it will be absolutely covered in maybe snow geese, ducks, little shorebirds. You just never know what you're going to get in a little habitat like that might be dried up in 3 days. But when I'm out birding, especially when, so much of the landscape just looks like hard to find a bird, let alone a flock of birds, something like this is going to draw them in for sure. This is what, a lot of times when I take a picture through my scope, it looks like this before I crop it. Or if I don't zoom it while I'm taking it, I get the big vignetted thing. But one of the places just south of town, if you're going south on Showboat Road toward Glenville, right before you get to the Glenville Road, there's a place called Air Lake, which is a flooded corn, a flooded pasture, basically, and you'll see cows in it. But all kinds of stuff lives out there, and it really helps to have a spotting scope, but you don't have to. You can go tramping, and I do. The back of my car always has, like fishing lures, hip waders, and that stuff, and I just get out and tramp. But you see that row of little birdies? Just hundreds of little migrating shorebirds, and there'll be all kinds of sparrows and blackbirds and things up in the rushes, bigger wading birds like ibises. Wherever these guys show up, peregrine falcons show up to eat them. So this again is in that same kind of habitat. You see the two birds there? Don't they look like a corn stubble come to life? These are snipe, as in snipe hunts, but snipe hunts are real things. They're a fat little wetland bird that comes through in pretty good numbers in the spring and have really, really camouflaged plumage. And I think they're legal game for those who hunt within a season. There's another wetland just south of Hanson, so north of town about 4 miles, and then back east another 3 miles from Hastings, on private ground. Beautiful, beautiful wetland. And registered with like Ducks Unlimited, and it's a private landowner, and a member of our church, who I happen to know, so he always comes out and bugs me when I pulled off on the side of his gravel road with my window down and my spotting scope resting on the windowsill. But whooping cranes, this is one of the most special birds we get in migration in Nebraska, and there were 3 adults and then a juvenile that spent like 10 days hanging out in the cornfield in Nebraska. And I think there's 500-ish in existence, like anywhere. And they spend the winter in Texas, and then they go clear up into Canada, a place called Wood Buffalo National Wildlife Refuge up in Canada to breed.
Was that in January?
This was in, they almost always, the sandhill cranes come and they peak at about the 3rd week of March. And by the end of March, most of the sandhill cranes have moved through, and then that's when the whooping cranes come in. Come in right around the 1st of April. So if you're going to find a whooping crane in Nebraska, it's probably going to be in the 1st week of April-ish. A pretty narrow migration. They come back through in the fall, but it's tougher to find them. They have a more leisurely, dispersed. This is, the wetland just on the southeast side of town. I don't know. I've never known what it's called. I sometimes call it like the radio station marsh. It's right on J Street turns there. I think it's don't know, there's several quadrants of land there, and I'm not even sure ever who owns it. But you can get tons and tons of birds. This is blackbirds coming through this spring, just filling the trees, and it's a really fun place to go look. There's lots of a variety of things there. This is down just south of Pauline. They get some big hills and some native grasslands that are just absolutely beautiful. I love the colors of native grasslands. That's one of the things I'm a sucker for. And one of the things you can find there and lots of places in Adams County is our state bird, anyone? Which meadowlark? Western, yes. The western Nebraska. They're the western meadowlark. There's the eastern meadowlark that also is in Nebraska, but we have almost all westerns. They have that kind of song. This is out at Prairie Lake. You all been to Prairie Lake much? That is a lovely place to hike. It's what? How long does it take to get there? 8 minutes? It's just south on Adams Central Road. Big property. And they've got a archery range thing there. My wife goes there in kayaks. But there are trails that go out through prairies, and there's this long row of pretty established old pine trees, and this path through the middle of it. In fact, you can sometimes find horse droppings because people take their horses to ride out here too. And just a wonderful wild place, very close to town. The trick in Nebraska, I think, especially Adams, well, not especially Adams County, but I read this, something like 97% of Nebraska is in private land ownership, which, right or wrong, good or bad, means that one of the challenges I find is finding places to go tramp, and not get in trouble for it. Trespassing. When in doubt, just pull out your collar. No. Clip that. It doesn't count for anything. It makes it worse. So, so there's not a ton of places that you can go, out on the land itself. But Prairie Lake is a good one. Kennesaw has a WPA. Just south of the town of Kennesaw is a fairly large wetland that starts in high grasses and then goes down into more wet areas. And you can walk through all of that. There's no trails, but you're sort of bushwhacking. You don't mind bushwhacking. Do you have other places that you like to go? Wild places?
The middle school garden.
Where's that?
Middle school garden.
The middle school garden. That's absolutely a great thought. And it's right backed up to that very large wetland that has lots of birds. Yep. I don't think people can go out on that, though. I haven't tried. I think the city owns it. Do anybody know? The big wetland behind the middle school, to the west of the middle school? Somebody go try it. And then report back to me, see what happens. Anyway.
Can we say you said it was okay to go?
No. Hartwell Park is a real oasis. When I think about where to find birds, I often think, what is a bird's eye view looking like, right? You're flying, say, in the spring, you've just flown over Kansas, and you're coming across, coming up through the middle of Adams County, and you're looking down, just big stretches of barren cornfield, and then you see Hastings. Hastings from the air, right, is like a forest. It is an absolute forest in the middle of prairie. And we have Lake Hastings, open water, deep open water. We've got Hartwell Park. And just to the east of Hartwell Park, of course, is Hastings Parkview Cemetery, which has some of the most extensive, old tree cover. And so it is a total, I'd say if one place had the most concentration of migrating small birds like warblers and vireos and orioles and things like that, it's probably Parkview Cemetery. but even this is my house. You know, but I'm picturing again a bird coming through from across Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, and then coming to a place like my little corner of Hastings, and seeing all these trees, including, you know, evergreens and deciduous trees, lots of places to stop. And you can set out feeders like I do. Feeder, 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 feeder. You can get, this is like a flock of about 300 pine siskins that was in my yard back in February. That's what these little guys are. They're a little finch, a very nomadic finch species, and mostly don't stick around for summer, but can be here in large numbers in the winter. Lake Hastings, I said, is another great place to look for birds. This is on the dike. And I mean, look at all the different birds that are in this picture. Obvious in the middle is, yes, the Canada goose. Anybody know what these little guys are?
Coots.
Yes, those are coots, which is they're a gallinaceous bird. They're like a chicken, sort of, the sort of chicken family of birds, related to ducks, but not quite ducks. And then all these gulls with black heads and white eye rings are Franklin's gulls. And when you see those big flocks of gulls coming over in the spring, that seems really weird. Like, why are seagulls in the middle of Nebraska? We get big numbers of migrating Franklin's gulls. And they'll follow the tractors, because the tractors turn up, you know, grubs and stuff, and so they follow the tractors in and feed. And then there's a Caspian tern stuck in the middle of it with a big bright red beak. And then these are ring-billed gulls. And then this one with the darker wing is a California gull. That's probably another California gull there. So you can get a whole bunch of different types of birds in one spot at Lake Hastings. This was right at the west end of Lake Hastings. Trash floating in the water. But it didn't deter this. Anybody know? It's an egret. And the trick in identifying this egret is its yellow feet. Black legs, but yellow feet. And also yellow, we call this the lores, the spot in front of the eye. Yellow lores and yellow feet. And that's a snowy egret. Beautiful, beautiful bird. And, you know, stopped by at Lake Hastings. Lots of bald eagles around. I don't know if you've noticed the enormous increase in bald eagles. It's crazy. From when they banned DDT as an insecticide back in 1972, the year I was born, that was really a low point for a lot of big raptors like bald eagles, osprey, and others. And they've made an enormous comeback since then. That chemical weakened their egg shells, and when they would they would lay eggs and then sit on the eggs, and the eggs would crack. So they would never have a chance to hatch, because the chemical broke down the eggshell and made them infertile. And so, since that's not the case anymore, bald eagles have taken off. They were keeping track of like how many. I mean, bald eagles basically were gone from Nebraska in the 50s and 60s. You would not ever find one, ever. And then they started not just to come back through migration, but to nest. And maybe 5 years ago, I think they quit tallying when they got to something like 200 active nests in Nebraska every summer. Isn't that amazing? So I know of one active nest, down on the Little Blue River by Pauline. Let's see. Oh, shoot. Where is that other one? I know of at least, there's one up by Hanson. I know of at least 3 active bald eagle nests in.
There's one 2 miles west of Donovan, up River Road.
Yes, that's right. Someone just showed me pictures of it. Of those 2 babies that were.
Seen the acres before.
Yeah. Yes, and Amick Acres has really good, and that's just outside, unfortunately for me, in my quest to see birds in Adams County, it's just outside the countable area. But, doesn't matter. Go see them at Donovan. So these show up, especially in the winter, they show up on Lake Hastings. Whenever there's waterfowl, they follow the waterfowl. And this is an adult. They don't get that full white head until age 4. So a lot of times you'll see a big eagle, same size as an adult eagle, but with a black head, and it's because it's still a juvenile. But they'll just be out on the ice. That one, you can see this is coming into his 4th year. Look at those feet. And they're pretty opportunistic. If they don't have to hunt for everything, they won't. They love roadkill. And they love dead fish. This is a Pacific loon that showed up in Lake Hastings. It's great. It's really quite a what they call a migrant trap. That migrating birds find a Lake Hastings in the middle of a lot of dry, flat ground, and they stop in for a drink and for some food. Oops. This guy, you can see these at Lake Hastings or at Hartwell Park almost every month of the year. I saw him in January. Took this picture in January.
Although there are not many this year.
Their numbers are down. Yeah. They generally don't want to be this far north in the winter. They usually retreat, but there's a couple because of the open water that they'll stay at Lake Hastings.
We had a nest of wood ducks in our maple tree in our front yard. We're on the west side of Burlington. And they jumped out of the nest on Mother's Day, and I couldn't see them getting to water because we're not anywhere near water. And then another time, I was driving up 11th, turning right onto Burlington. Here's a mother wood duck taking her 10 babies across the street. Oh. And I could not believe it. But it was at noontime, it was 1 o'clock, and the cars going either direction stopped.
Make way for
and
ducklings.
The mother took the 10 wood ducks across the
road.
road.
My gosh.
And they all made it. I was just, but they nest a long way from water. It's amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing. They are amazing birds. And some of the most colorful in North America. Mm-hmm. Baltimore Orioles. Lots of these around. Way more than people think. If you put out jelly feeders, and I have jelly feeders out, you can get dozens of these in your yard. They love to come down and eat just plain, cheap grape jelly.
Put out our 4th big jar of grape jelly.
Yes, there you go. Yeah, they love it.
Orchard and Baltimore.
Yeah, there's a smaller cousin to the Baltimore Oriole, less common, but an orchard Oriole, and it's more of a brick red color in the chest, and they'll be around as well. I already showed you that too. I'm not sure. Oh, indigo bunting. These will be at the cemetery and other places, kind of weedy places, edge places. Indigo buntings. They have the distinctive thing about they're small. They're surprisingly hard to see, even though they're that brightly colored. If you don't get the light right on them, they just kind of look black, sometimes, and they kind of can blend into the shadows pretty easily. But they have a distinctive 2-part call that they make these little couplets. But 2 notes together, and up and then down, up and down, but always 2 on the same note. And that's what I listen for. And that's how I almost always find my indigo buntings. Do you know this spot? This is, it doesn't always look quite like this. This is that, what do they call it? 32-mile creek overflow area or something. It's straight west of Lake Hastings on Gravel Road, right over the railroad tracks, right by the airport, straight north of the airport. Oh yeah, on North Marion Road, where Marion turns to gravel, just over the tracks. And there's all these trees in the background, and there's this water, and this was a day when the water was being drawn down, I guess, and so you had a lot of edge habitat, and all of this sunflowers came up. But when you find a spot like that, oh man, so pretty and so full of birds. One of the things that I'm always looking for in spots like this, and see, you can see some of them there. See that little guy? Those 3. That might be one. That looks like maybe some ducks. But it's those little, I'm just looking for aberrations. See, there's one. There's one. Those are shorebirds, and they come in some of the most interesting varieties and colors and shapes. And if you don't, if you don't leave your yard, you're not going to see this. But these are not uncommon in our county, especially in the spring, and then again now in the fall. And fall migration starts now. Like these birds, these shorebirds they've bred in the Arctic, and by July they're coming back south already. They don't think of this does not feel like fall migration, right? But it is for the shorebirds. They're one of the first ones that start heading back south. And they have a leisurely migration. They'll be coming back through the state of Nebraska all through July, August, September, even clear to the 1st of November. But that's a marbled godwit. Kind of fun name. The marbled godwit. These are American aphacets. And
I was just going to ask you, and then that came up, I was going to ask you if you had seen any aphacets lately. I haven't seen any. And
they won't be here in the summer, but in the spring and fall. And so these were here in large numbers in May. I found a flock of them at a little flooded cornfield, wetland, north of town, about 5 miles. I think there was 170 or something in the flock. I mean, just big numbers sometimes. Isn't that beautiful? And one of the few birds with a beak that goes up. Not too many birds have a beak that curves up, but aphacets do. And these little guys, this is an American golden plover. You can see the golden plumage on these things. One of the longest distance migrants. They winter down in like Patagonia, so like Argentina, and then they'll nest in the high Arctic. And then they stop at a cornfield in Nebraska and get a bite to eat among our cows, and it's glorious. This goofy looking guy is called a dunlin, another shorebird, a little black belly and a red upper parts and a long droopy bill, about this big. Yellow-headed blackbirds, again, are just a really underappreciated bird, I think, in Nebraska. And have you seen this bird?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they'll come. Yes, they've got a terrible sound. It's it sounds like being choked out. But so pretty, and they'll nest in our wetlands. But in the spring, they'll come through even in town, and sometimes big numbers. I've seen them out at the mall a number of times. This is what a flock coming through town looks like. And they'll cover the ground, and big white wing patches on black, and bright yellow heads. Stunning birds. And you can see them by the hundreds every spring if you go out looking. Brown thrashers, again, are really common in Nebraska. But sometimes that's one that I get phone calls about at church. Ask for this bird in the yard. It's kind of brown-orange on the back and real stripy on the front. Brown thrasher. We're getting into the time of year where sparrows start to be the thing that I get excited about. This is a grasshopper sparrow. There's so many kinds. There's like 30 kinds of sparrows. And, the beauty is in the details. This is a Leconte's sparrow. Look at that ochre-colored buffy face and that almost purplish on the back of the head. I just love those guys. And they'll be in our wet areas. Look at those big toes. Dick sissels? There's no way you haven't seen hundreds of these. You just may not know that you've seen hundreds of these. But pick a gravel road in our county and drive for a mile, and there's going to be one of these on a corner. There's going to be one of these on a telephone pole, on a power line, singing its name. Dick, Dick, Sissel, Dick, Dick, Sissel. And they just sing incessantly all summer long. And aren't they pretty? You got a chestnut color here, black kind of a V mark, and yellow, big bill, almost kind of bluish bill. And there's so many of these little sparrow-type birds. Coming on soon to put up hummingbird feeders. Usually 1st of August, I like to put up my hummingbird feeders, and clear through September, October even, you can get hummers in your yard. This is the time of year to do it. They hardly ever stop in spring, but you can have them for all of August for sure, and into September in your yard. That's our smallest bird, ruby-throated hummingbirds in Nebraska. This is our largest bird. And again, people who aren't lots into bird watching, like weirdly am, but don't know how common the American pelican is in Nebraska. But they come through in big numbers. Some of you have been down to Harlan. They've been advertising this as kind of their tourist thing of pelican days. They'll take you out on boats out on Harlan and look at the big pelicans. I haven't done it, but they'll be on Lake Hastings. They'll be
for the solar eclipse.
Yeah.
We were sitting on the Allen Bridge. Of course, you showed up there eventually.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and in the middle of the solar eclipse, a flight of about 25 pelicans flew over in the middle of the day, going from southwest to northeast, right over the bridge. He's going.
Oh yeah.
Are you kidding me?
Absolutely. They are just B-52s. They're so big. One of the big surprises for me doing this year of seeing how many birds I can see in Adams County. I'm up to 203 species for the year in our county. And one of the big surprises is a barred owl. I've been birding here obsessively for 20 years and never once seen a barred owl. And I've seen now 3 of them in Adams County this year. And notice those dark eyes. There's lots of great horned owls around, but very few barred owls, which is really a bird of the south. And it's moving up our river valleys. It's moving up the Republican River Valley. It's moving up the Big Blue River Valley. It's moving along the Platte and moving west, moving north and west into Nebraska. So
where did you see
keep an eye out for barred owls.
Oh, where did you see
One was this was the cemetery. Well, wait, I think yes. Yep, I saw one twice in Parkview Cemetery this spring. And another of them is down just south and west of town by it's that little town, Assumption. It's like 8 houses. It's easy to miss. But down around there. I didn't see this year, but you never know what you're going to see. This was between Hastings and Juniata, the edge of a cornfield a few years ago. And I took my daughter out, and she and I got in our bellies and took a picture of this snowy owl. There was a kind of an invasion year that year where numbers of them came down from the Arctic and spent a good part of the winter with us. But isn't that a stunning bird? You think, how is that in Hastings, Nebraska? And of course, the sandhill cranes. You got the gateway drug, as you said, into birding. Come see that. When I got the call 20 years ago to come to Hastings, Nebraska, that's the only thing I knew about it was like, because I called on my call documents at the seminary. Where do you want to go? I said, just nothing. Midwest. Mountains, coast, deep south, just not the Midwest. I've been here all my life. Hastings, Nebraska. Turns out that's the Midwest. But when they said Hastings, Nebraska, I was like, that's the Central Flyway. That's the crane place. Between Kearney and Hastings, Grand Island, this is where the cranes come through. So I was excited, and it's not disappointed. Obviously, there's lots and lots of birds to see here. We're right at this perfect spot where the east meets the west, the north meets the south. And if you have a fear of oceans, it's a great place to live. 1,000 miles from any ocean, go any which way. You cannot get to an ocean from here. But we got a lot of birds that come right through the center of the continent. And I think more stunning than our crane migration, for me, is the snow grease migration. I mean, it's actually a problem environmentally. There should not be this many. Last year they came out with a report through Science Magazine, about the state of birds, and the big headlines in the newspapers were, there are 1 billion fewer birds in our skies today than when I was born. Overall, total numbers of just birds down about 30 to 40%. 30 to 40% fewer birds today than in 1970. But interestingly, as you dig into the details, and something like snow geese, there are 10 times more snow geese than there were when I was a kid. There's millions of snow geese that come through Nebraska, and there frankly shouldn't be. But it is a stunning thing. It's so loud. It's amazing. And then, of course, they've opened the hunting season up, and it's just, they can't put a tent in it. So, anyway, happy to call this place my home for 20 years, and seeing a lot of birds, and a lot of, one thing you can't market it, but sunsets. I was just talking to somebody from Michigan. They were like, I miss the sunsets in Nebraska. Yeah. When the trees are here, there's your daylight. And we got all this. Sun up to sundown, skies. Skies and birds full of skies. Skies full of birds. Questions for me?
Did you see a white-winged dove yet for your... I have one that comes to my yard almost every day.
You do?
Yeah, and it perches on top of my bird feeder's hook. So, yeah.
A white-winged dove.
Yeah.
It's another one of those birds, and this may be, I don't know, in the years that I've been here, it's evident that more and more southern birds are moving here and staying here. So, Carolina wrens. Named because you go to the Carolinas to see these things. There's one in my yard every day. White-winged doves. Arizona, Texas, and increasingly in Nebraska.
Yeah.
The bird that I'm really hoping to get, and be the first person in Nebraska to see, is a roadrunner. They are now in Kansas. They're established in Kansas, along with the armadillos that are moving up. And maybe see that picture of armadillo in Lincoln a few years ago. So, roadrunners are going to come to Nebraska, but they're not here yet. But there might be. Just check those southern counties. Lots of southern birds moving up. And I have seen a white-winged dove a couple times. One was in Ayer, in the town of Ayer, next to the grain elevator, back in January. Again, a southern bird, a Texas bird, in January in Nebraska.
And it's different every year, different things. I mean,
Yeah.
You don't have any warblers in your pictures there, but this I didn't think was a particularly good warbler.
It was a
year
rotten
this
warbler year.
Last year it was great. The only thing I had in my yard that was really great was a yellow throat that I didn't expect, and all of a sudden there it was.
Yeah.
Because I thought I was going to be looking at a wren, and then put my scope on it, and then it was a yellow throat.
Yeah, they're a wetland bird, and to show up in Little Hastings is great.
But it's interesting how things have changed over the years.
Yes, it
Nothing
has.
is static. So I always had mourning doves, but now I've got 3 different species of doves.
Yes, if you all haven't become aware of the Eurasian collared dove, first one showed up in Nebraska in 1997. And they've been, and now, it was a big deal, and now they're just, they came from Europe and Asia, Eurasian collared dove, and settled in the Caribbean, and then moved up and established a population in South Florida. And from there, just launched, and suddenly they were up through Georgia and up the East Coast, and then they were in Chicago, and then they showed up in Nebraska, and then they bred like crazy. And they'll breed almost any time of year. I've seen them make a nest in January in my yard. So you guys, especially the small towns, by the elevators and stuff, you'll see a flock of 100, 150 of these Eurasian collared doves that were simply not here in 1995, not one.
We've seen our owls and our sharp-shinned hawks and everything increase in population, and the Eurasians go down.
Yeah, they go.
We're going to get those other ones.
If you hear that sound. And then they make an awful clatter
It's
too.
an owl. You think it's
Yeah.
an owl, but
It's
it's not.
just full of them. What tracks them there?
so much. I mean,
Yeah.
because they're everywhere. And
Yeah, yeah, they love rows of like pine trees and stuff to nest in. They really like that.
Did you see any chickadees?
No.
We don't either, and
Nope.
I think they never came back after West Nile.
That's exactly right. Black-capped chickadees were hit really hard in 2004, 2003, 2004 when West Nile virus hit in our area. It really knocked out certain species, blue jays and crows, magpies especially got a hard hit, and then chickadees. And I don't know quite why it was, but I had chickadees in my yard, my feeder, when I first moved here, and I have literally not seen a single chickadee since 2004. Not one in the whole county. You can go to Grand Island and find them, but they just have not repopulated Hastings. So if you see a black-capped chickadee, get excited and tell me. in that order, get excited and tell me, because I would love to see a chickadee again. Yeah.
Turtle doves, what's the main identification for Eurasian to our native turtle dove? Kennedy, the song?
Yes, so the technical names are, so Eurasian collared dove is the new kid on the block, and our native species is the mourning dove, M-O-U-R, mourning dove, and it has the
It's so relaxing, you know. And it's,
Yeah. And they're smaller,
They're fainter, the sound.
darker, smaller bird, thinner,
Yeah.
darker, and a pointed tail.
Oh.
And our new doves are paler, almost white sometimes, chunkier, and with a squared off tail. And instead of that 5-note call, it's a 3 notes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I was trying to figure that out. I mean, I thought I knew the difference.
So when the mourning dove flies, it kind of whistles through its
Yes, that's a good point.
feathers. Yeah,
But the Eurasian collared dove will also,
it sounds awful.
yeah, so there's this. Ignore that little twizzle in the background, but just that. But then they do this. That.
Irritating. But I don't hold it against them.
No, I do.
Yeah.
Question.
Yeah.
For you, when you feed the birds
Yeah.
with their feeders,
Mhm.
do you feel inside you that you're treating them all equally? In other words, you don't have, you know what I mean? Like some people say, oh, you know,
Sure.
I'm on, you know, like birds versus squirrels, you know.
Right.
I kind of.
That's a great question. I think I would say part of it is the reality of the checkbook, of the wallet, right? Because you get a flock of 100 grackles in your yard, and they will eat 50 pounds of sunflower seeds in a day. And you say, well, I want to be equitable, but I can't afford equitable, you know. So I play favorites. I do. I take my feeders down when there's large flocks of blackbirds. I say, you know, there is leftover corn, a lot of it, just outside town. So out you go.
Since you're talking about blackbirds.
But the squirrels, no, I don't mind a squirrel or two. But when I look in my backyard and there are 9 squirrels, I think that's called an infestation, a rodent infestation, and it's a problem, and I don't like it. So
Back to blackbirds. My observation, it seems like in the spring you're just inundated with lots of blackbirds.
Sure.
And they take over
Yep.
and nest. And do they have just one set of babies? Because it seems like after the spring and kind of early summer, right now,
Right.
you don't see them.
Right, and that is just what you described, you know, it accounts for that, because they're coming through in large flocks, and And then as soon as it's summer where they're breeding, they're paired off. So it doesn't make sense for them, because now they're all in competition. So in the spring and in the fall, it serves them to be all together in one big flock. But they don't nest colonially like that. At least grackles don't. I mean, they'll nest kind of near each other. Redwing, some species will nest colonially, like lots of nests in one area. The yellow-headed blackbirds do that in the marshes, but it's nice to have the reprieve from huge flocks of blackbirds. But they'll be back. You first.
So growing up, there was pheasants everywhere.
Yeah.
And now we got turkeys everywhere. Are they a territorial bird that destroy pheasant nests, quail nests, or my dad was telling me he heard that somewhere. I didn't know that for sure.
Turkeys and the turkeys and the pheasants are really going to occupy different habitats. So I wouldn't think of them as too much in direct competition. Our turkeys are native. Our pheasants are not. I mean, the pheasants they came from the Far East, areas like China and Japan, and that area of Asia is where they were brought over back quite a long time ago in the 1800s, but established themselves pretty well. The bobwhite quail are kind of our native, more equivalent to the pheasant. You'll see them in the same habitats along. But the push, the price of corn having soared has really just made for if there's a couple acres on the edge of a cornfield, let's make sure we are getting corn all the way to the road. And we've just seen that in 20 years. Lots of places that I would say, that's a place to stop and see pheasants or to see bobwhite quail in this little corner, in a fence row, hedge row, a corner. And with all of that, the pressure to make sure you get every last, square inch into corn or beans or whatever, that's one of the results that I've seen.
When my dad said that, it made me think like you see turkeys and think like, oh, that's the street gang.
Yeah.
They just take those.
Yeah, but they really like the woods. The turkeys really want and need, because they'll roost in trees overnight, and the pheasants, they like the open country. They don't really want to be in. You're not going to find them in the woods. So, okay. Sir.
I was wondering how long do you have to wait to get pictures of the birds you...
That's a great question. Sometimes till I cramp up. A lot of times I'll think ahead about the shot I want to get. So some of those birds in the yard, I will set some feed on the ground and stick a stick out of the ground, and I know that the goldfinch is going to, before it lands on the ground, it's going to land on the top of that stick, because that's just what they want to do. And so I will set up farther than you from me, but not too much farther away, and set my scope up and just sit and have it ready and wait. And you sit there for, half an hour sometimes. The other really fun thing to do, and I did this a lot when I was a kid back in Indiana, is sit out. There's certain species that aren't too afraid of people. Red-breasted nuthatches, chickadees, although we've kind of lost them here. Nuthatches. And you can put feed in your hand and just sit. And eventually they will come down and eat out of your hand, and it's so exciting to have a wild bird come and they're so light, it's amazing. They just weigh nothing at all. And you feel the little feet on them. Take a seed and fly off, and that's always kind of fun to do. It takes time. Usually wear the same outfit. So, sit in the same place. I'll have a feeder hanging there for a bunch of days, and they'll get used to that, and then I'll take the feeder away and just have the food on me, and sit in a chair, comfortable position, once that local bird kind of gets to know you, there's a local guy up at the what's the Lockland, who feeds robins raisins, and all summer long he'll just put a few raisins out on his patio. And he's retired, so he sits at home a lot. And by midsummer, he'll just hold a raisin out, and the robin will hop up and take it out of his hand and go eat it. And I think that's really fun. Takes some practice and patience, but it's getting harder. Other questions?
Yvette and I were walking last year down Shoemaker Island Road.
Yeah.
And
up the Elder Road to the bridge.
and then go west.
Go west.
And
Neat road.
Pardon?
Neat road.
It is. And we noticed this bird following us from post to post to post. And Yvette said it was a certain bird. I don't remember what she said.
I had a lot of yellow, so
Yeah.
my first name was yellow.
So, were you limping? Was it a vulture?
No. But it came out of nowhere.
Following you.
The brain is quite an organ too. You know?
Yes.
I don't know where it came from, but I had in biology in college, we had to identify a certain number of birds.
Yep.
And it's been many, many years. I'm an old person now. And out of the clear blue, bobblehead came out of my mouth.
Oh, sure.
And so we got online and looked at our bird book. I don't remember, but it was bobblehead.
Bobolink. Oh,
And
those are
you
so
mentioned earlier
pretty.
in your slideshow, there was another bird that comes from Patagonia. Which one is that?
The American golden plover.
Okay, the plover. Well, we got the bobblehead.
Yes.
It travels like 5,000 miles from somewhere in South America.
They call it the rice bird because it
And
fills all
of
the rice
places
fields.
it
And,
could go to for 5,000 miles.
Yeah.
It came here probably because like you did. No. It
Probably
loves
so.
our prairie.
yeah, and that's the one habitat that's been hit hardest in the last 50 years, actually, in terms of birds. It's not the forests or the wetlands or the coasts. It's our grasslands, our native grasslands are the kind of the most imperiled. You look at the bird populations, and it's birds like the bobolink that have seen an 80% drop. It's not just 30 or 40%. Henslow sparrows, but down the list, it's the big native prairies that have taken it the hardest in the last 50 years.
Paul, have you ever birded at the Arboretum's Xeriscape Garden there at Highland Park, where the Arboretum is? You know, Jane Marie planted a whole bunch of native grasses.
Yes.
And I think that when I've walked through there, I've heard more sparrows and different sparrows
Interesting.
because of those grasses than I had in the previously. So that might be actually a hot
I love
spot
that.
for-
I hope that's true. Yeah. I know that just north of there, there's a row of big pine trees, and that's where you can find yellow-bellied sapsuckers in the falls.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know they were in here.
Yeah, you can see the holes. They make a ring of holes all around the same spot in the trunk. So if you see, that's a yellow-bellied sapsucker. Drills a hole and then tends those wells and sucks the sap up.
Are sparrows native, or were they brought into?
Which one?
Yeah. So there's
Maybe it varies.
probably 25 species of native sparrows.
How many?
25, I guess. Native, yes. So white-crowned and white-throated and lacants and just Lincolns, and there's so many different kinds, and they're really fun. But the ones in town that you often see are actually the house sparrows, they're called. There's lots of those. Those are not native. They were brought over as part of this effort by people in Europe to try to establish the European birds in North America, and they took off, and they loved it, and they've had just a huge explosion of birds, and they're actually not part of our native. They're not actually closely related to our native sparrows. They're a weaver finch, but there's thousands of them, and I wish I could get rid of some of them.
Well, our neighbor, we have a neighbor a couple of doors down from us. He put up purple martin houses.
Oh, and it's full of house sparrows.
And, well, he's got 12 pairs of purple martins.
Oh,
And
good.
he made them out of gourds.
Yeah.
But anyway, I walked over there to talk to him, and there was a box down there on the ground, and I thought it was a feeder maybe, and I said, what is that box? That's a sparrow trap.
Yeah, and because they are
sparrows.
Yep, because house sparrows, Passer domesticus, I think is the Latin, that species is not native. They are not protected under the Migratory Bird Act and local.
But are they a threat to the purple martin?
They will just, they'll, occupy the spot.
That's it.
And so you're allowed to mess with the nests of starlings and house sparrows because they're not a native species, and they're considered an invasive pest species because there's so many of them. So,
Is there any reason for us to stop feeding the birds because of the virus that's hitting some of the bird populations in the east?
Great question. That big flock of, in my yard, the little dots, and then I showed you the picture of the pine siskin. Those have been particularly prone this year to salmonella, and I've started finding dead both goldfinches and pine siskins under my feeders, and so I took all my feeders down, I washed them in bleach, I put them back up about a week later, and then about a week after that I started seeing dead birds again, and so I took my feeders back down. That's what really you're kind of supposed to do. It's tough. And just because I bleached my feeders doesn't mean my neighbor 20 yards away bleached theirs, right? And so they can, and it's a feeder. Can you think of a better design for like making a bird sick, right? It's one little hole that you stick your face in, and then one bird that is sick sticks its face in, and then 100 other birds follows and sticks its face into the same hole. So of course they're going to share that illness. The house finches are also really prone to conjunctivitis. Lots of times I'll see these little red house finches with gunky, gross eyes, and they like swell up and they swell shut, and then eventually they go blind and they die. But that's the same thing. They're sticking in it and they get the goopy eye and they stick it in a feeding hole, and then the next bird comes along, and of course it contracts it because it's putting its eye in contact with the goop from the other bird anyway. So you do have to keep your feeders clean. It helps to bleach them. And when you start seeing dead birds or really sick birds at your feeder, I think it's good to just pull them down and let them go. Because out in the wild, they come on a patch of sunflower seeds the size of this room. They'll land on it, and in a day they'll have it cleaned out. So then they have to leave, right? So they're not staying in the same place, getting the disease concentrated. So if you move them out of town, it's really better for their health if there's a sickness going around. Otherwise, I think it's fine.
One of the birds that is kind of learned about that was really good, the waxwing.
Yeah, cedar waxwings.
Saw the photographer of those and had some at Stewart Museum, a picture of those, and it just struck me. And I think maybe I might have seen one in Juniata, but I'm not sure. But just want to know if you've seen those.
Yes, especially in. It's hard to find them in the summer now, but through winter, they will flock with robins, and you'll especially see them, cedar waxwings, aptly named, in cedar groves, cedar trees. They like to eat the little purple cedar, blue cedar berries. And then after they spend the winter, usually around, with flocks of robins, say along the Little Blue River Valley and out in the country, then it comes spring and they'll move into town. Both the robins and the waxwings move into town, and they are looking for all of those ornamental fruit trees. So around Lake Hastings, for instance, there are tons of those little 12, 15-foot crabapple trees with all of the withered fruit on it, and you will see hundreds around Lake Hastings, for instance, in those. In my head, I have a map of where the best ornamental fruit trees are. And there's one just west of the water park. Such a glorious tree that looks like, it weighs 1,000 pounds of fruit on it. And every time I drive by there, through like February, March, April. Keep an eye, nothing. And then one day, 100 cedar waxwings. And the way you find them, if you don't mind having your wind, I can't reproduce it because it's so high pitched, and it's one of the birds that, unfortunately, as we age and we lose the higher frequencies, it's a bird that you stop being able to hear after a certain age. You hear that?
That was what I heard, I'm pretty sure.
Very high, piercing call, or in this is like 1. Now imagine that times 100. If you can hear it, you really hear it. But it's that.
Sometimes they're up in the hackberries too, because they're like.
Yes, they do. They like the hackberries.
That's where they come at my house, the hackberries.
Yep.
I saw that.
Yeah.
And they are, twist my arm, make me pick my favorite bird. Cedar waxwing might be it. I just love them. They're so, the subtlety of their plumage, they got that cool crest. Some of them have little waxy red tips to the feathers, which is where they get their name, the waxwing. Yellow on the base of the tail. Just lovely, elegant birds.
I promise this is my last question.
Okay.
Just got more to still. But songs,
Yep.
I would assume, is the bird's way of communicating.
Yep.
They communicate.
Right.
I've noticed we've been watching like the wrens
Yep.
or the cardinals,
Yep.
whatever. They have many different songs. And it seems like on the wrens, we always raise wrens,
Yeah. Good.
that there's different, communication sounds, like when they're mating, it seems like, or when they're feeding the young, or whatever.
Yeah.
Is that true?
It is, and it's on that Simply's app, which is one of the fun things that you can go down and listen to 5, 6, 7 different songs of bird. Some almost endlessly diverse songs. Mockingbirds, for instance, starlings, my goodness, they mimic anything. They trick me all the time, stinkers. I'm like, oh, screech owl. Nope. Car alarm. Nope. Yeah. Well, thank you all. I don't know what time it is, but it feels like I've gone at least an hour. Some of you probably have places to go, but I'm so glad you were all here. Text me, call me, whatever. You look me up. I'm happy to. It's one of my happiest things. The phone call that says, "What is this bird?"